Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another night of interviews with our candidates for City Council for North Kansas City. Jessica Loya is the guest this evening, the candidate that's running in Ward 1. And yeah, we're going to have to think about those words because they don't go in chronological order and they don't always make sense. But we're going to figure it out as a community, and hopefully there'll be some better mapping and better descriptions of those words coming forward, so it's easier for people. And let me just double check something. I've just got a message in. Someone's having difficulty viewing, so let me just double check real quick. Looks like it's all good on our end.
I can see it.
Okay, then here we go. So Jessica Loya is a resident of North Kansas City. Obviously, to run, you must be a resident. What made you decide to run for office in North Kansas City?
Well, I could tell you it wasn't something that was planned, in the past. Oops. It was more of an organic build. I definitely found myself getting involved a lot more during the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, it was more grassroots advocacy and activism, just in general, helping out in whatever ways I can, specifically with the homeless community. And then once the pandemic began, like the tensions in the city were getting up there with all of the other national issues going on. I found myself involved and helping, to organize a little community advocacy group, things like that. And then from there, it just kind of seemed like a organic progression of events. I knew that I wanted to continue being involved, helping in any way I can, talking to people in the community. And it just kind of seemed like sitting on city council would be a really good option to make some positive changes, connect with people, and kind of just make sure the community is moving in the direction that we as residents, as people who live here or work here or own businesses here, like as we want to see it, to kind of give that control back to the people.
So when you first told your person, now that could be your daughter or your best friend, whomever that person is that you go to, and you said that you were going to do this, what was their response?
Um, there were mixed reviews. It depends on. So my daughter was very excited in the beginning, but anybody who knows my daughter, she's always with me around. She definitely expects a lot of attention on her. And for me to suddenly be, she was used to our normal schedule, work and other things. And then suddenly I have all these other meetings going on. And this started before city council. This was when we were working on the equity and inclusion committee. But honestly, very quickly, she kind of started to love it. She forms her own opinions. We talk about a lot of the things happening in the city. She jokes that, she's going to be on city council. And I was like, that would be awesome. You got some years. You have to be legal voting age to do that. But, in that time in between now and then, like, I just like that she's civically minded and it kind of inspires that. So with her, it was thumbs up. She thought it would be a good plan. My sister is my other person. She does not live here. She lives in Michigan, and she was also excited and supportive, but I think a little more hesitant, didn't really know what the reaction would be, doesn't know a lot about our community, although I'm constantly trying to get her to move out here to be closer to us. We'll see if I win on that one. And then I think the more that she learned about our community and like what I wanted to do, with the other projects we were working on, she was definitely very excited and saw it again as an organic progression. I think anybody who knows me knows that I like to talk about things that we can do better, things that we can change, whether it's with ourselves or as a community, as a city. And I talk about these things a lot. And I think for people who don't live here, like my sister, they're like, I understand half of what you're discussing. Like, I get it. You're very passionate about it. I just don't know what you're talking about. So again, I think it was just for them, they saw it as like an organic progression of what I was already doing, and just getting a little more actively involved.
So what was your biggest draw in your decision to move to North Kansas City and settle here?
So we looked for a while. I knew that as my daughter was a little older, we did a lot of traveling before she was of school age. And then when we were ready to settle down, I wanted a place that was home, a sense of belonging and community. We looked at a lot of places in Kansas City, Missouri, and we definitely found some nice little houses and things like that, but nowhere near the sense of immediate belonging that we felt here. So when we first came to look at the house, my neighbor Bill was outside, and he was chit-chatting with us, telling us all about the neighborhood, all about the house, all about the history. And then that just kind of kept happening. We had neighbors, even as we were kind of getting into it, inviting us over to see their houses, kind of knowing. I think that's another thing about, like, everybody knows everybody in North Kansas City. People knew the status of the inside of the home, like things that were going to need to be fixed. People were offering to help us move things in. Like, we weren't going to find that anywhere else. So that was our immediate draw, not to mention all of the great family places. We love the park. Everything is so walkable. I think for somebody who had a younger child at the time, still young, 10, for us, it just seemed like the best place that I could raise my daughter. It seemed like home from pretty much the first time that I stepped onto the porch of my house before I had even purchased it, with all the neighbors. And I will tell you that continues to happen. I coined the term aggressively friendly, that North Kansas Cityans were aggressively friendly. You can't walk up to Screenland on a nice day without having like 7 conversations. I actually tried to plot that time now so that I know, like, I'll leave like 10 minutes early when I'm trying to be somewhere on a nice day, because I know, I'm going to talk to 3 or 4 neighbors on the way there. So,
Well, being aggressively friendly is a good thing.
it is.
I think people are like, oh my God, they're going to talk to me.
But here in North Kansas City, like, you just get used to it. You just know it's going to happen. That's what I mean. I had a gap of time. I'm like a little cushion, because I know it's going to happen. And honestly, I love it. Like, especially during the pandemic, when you were, walking, I was out walking my dog, or I'd see neighbors. Even though we had to be on separate sides of the street, or, quite a distance away from each other, it was still really nice to have people, to talk to people, to have that community around you. Even if we couldn't be out barbecuing or hanging out, we could still stop and have a chat and catch up and make sure everyone's okay. So anyways, yes, this community, it's lovely. I don't mind aggressively friendly.
So what did the pandemic teach you about leadership?
I think the pandemic taught us all an exceptional amount about leadership. I think we saw a lot of people stepping up into leadership roles. I think we watched small business owners, especially, really try to be the leaders that they had to be in that moment, which was something new for everybody, but coming up with these new ways of doing things that would fit this current system, the pandemic. But I also think we saw failures in leaderships nationally, even within the state of Missouri. And I think at a time when leaders should have been trying more to unify people and bring people together, there was just these extreme partisan politics at play, where it made it really hard to make any single decision without some sort of partisan politics in the mix. So when we were discussing mask orders here, like watching our city council members step up, that was pretty awesome. It wasn't, the main reason that I chose to run, but it was definitely in there. Watching our current city council members try to navigate this pandemic, they stepped up, they did a lot. It was a lot of work, unprecedented decision making, and there was a lot of pushback from people over various things. But I think I just watching them, like, I think we learned that communication needs to be worked on. I know there's varying opinions on that, but I definitely think that we learned in times like this, when we are all struggling and decisions are kind of on the fly, things are changing weekly, like, open communication is vital to us figuring out what we're doing. Hearing that community input was important. But really, I just, the pandemic was a catalyst for change. It changed the way that we live our everyday lives. It made us heavily reliant on technology. And I think our city adjusted. And I think watching that as a leadership role or those people in those leadership roles was really interesting. I enjoyed, I know a lot of, so like Jesse Smith was very active, doing a lot of research. I know that. I definitely got to see that. But for me, I think we want to focus on what we learned from the pandemic, and how we can do better going forward, preparing for the next anything that could occur. I really hope it's not a pandemic anytime soon. But as far as emergencies, like, were we completely prepared for that? Now that we've been through it, the leaders in the city, the small business owners, everybody who it affected, even the residents of the city, like, I definitely think at some point in time, as things level out, we should have a pretty good discussion about what we think we did really well during the pandemic, where we think we could have done a little bit better. Like, I think reflecting on that is going to be really important for future. And I just think there's a lot of things like that, and not even specifically pandemic related. I know as we reached those freezing temperatures, we learned a lot about how things work, and how we can do better in the future. So I think for me, the pandemic was just a really good reminder that we are constantly growing, sometimes being forced to adapt very rapidly. And for us to be able to do that, there does need to be some prior preparation. So now we know something like that can happen. Now we know better. Now we can do better next time. But I don't know, the pandemic has been crazy for everybody. I don't think there's any individual who would say that they've had a fun 2020 and beginning of 2021. But as far as our community is concerned, I saw a lot of people step up. I saw people offering, people who were doing better, offering, either their stimulus payments or just any way that they could help their neighbors. So I saw people step up in like big and small ways. I know my neighbor Alex, and even Wes Graves is my neighbor up here. He was offering help in any ways he could. We were doing grocery deliveries for people. So I don't know, for me, watching everybody kind of pull together during the pandemic was probably the biggest lesson in leadership, in the sense that it doesn't have to be on a grand scale. People didn't have to be out there doing big things. It was those little things, just knocking on your neighbor's door, asking if they needed groceries. But for me, it was just people stepping up when they needed to, when they were called upon to do so. So I don't know. I really hope we take away a lot from the pandemic and everything that happened, and how we can be ready, be prepared for those kinds of things in the future.
So as we think about the last 110, 12 years or so that we've been a city, there's a lot of things that we have that we are rich in the history of in North Kansas City. What is one thing that you would like to preserve and take with us into the future from the past little over 100 years?
Right. Well, I mean, for me, if we're like near future, far future, whatever it is, I think one of my favorite things about our community is the accessibility of small businesses and the way that they can thrive here. We rally around them. We are a community that doesn't just, have some small businesses here that we like we support them. We support local. We are very adamant and very good about this. So for me in the future, I'd love to see us to really, really hone in on that and really nurture our small businesses and make sure that this is, the best place that they can grow and thrive. And yeah, it's that. It's all the family businesses, you guys at Expressive, we got Rabbit Hole coming. And then we have things like Cultivar, where they are, again, during the pandemic, kind of forced them to shift yet again and change their whole vibe. So now they have multiple places in there. Like, it's really just watching these little businesses grow and thrive in our city. Like, that's what I look forward to in the future, seeing more of that, more sense of community. Like, I know some people feel that these like the growth of our city is impacted by these small businesses and that we just want people to come here for that. Like, well, obviously, if you have a small business, you want people to come. You need people to come. That's how you survive. But for me, when it comes to our businesses, like Screenland, you guys are all very community oriented. So it's not just that you exist within this community, like you and Adam, live here, but we do have business owners that don't live here, and they are still equally as invested in the well-being of North Kansas City. They want to be involved, and they want to have a voice. For me, as we look at what we've done really well in the past, I think it's to create that safe haven for those businesses, and I really want to make sure we keep doing that. So for me, if I had to pick one thing, that is it. I want us to really hold on to that kind of small town mom and pop vibe that we have. But yeah.
So what's one thing that you get excited about the most about the future of North Kansas City?
Oh, does this mean like things coming in, or
just
it
could be anything? Whatever gets you the most excited about North Kansas City and the future of it.
When I think about the future of North Kansas City, I think it just excites me in general. I feel like we are currently experiencing a shift, a change, kind of forced progress, where it's like maybe things have been a little stagnant in the past and it's time that we start paying attention. I definitely see community members more vocal and involved. And I'm kind of excited for the direction that is going to take us in, and having more engaged community members, having people, paying attention to what's happening. And then even, council members wanting to make sure that they are effectively communicating with the community. To me, that right there, that's going to push us the furthest. Now, if we're talking specific things, my daughter cannot wait for the rabbit hole to open, and I am equally as excited. The young child inside of me cannot wait to go and check this out. But other than that, I'm excited for the direction of our city, and for hopefully the community to have a lot more input in the future in that direction.
So Armour Road has been a super hot topic, and lots of voices have kind of spoken up about what they think about Armour Road. What could we have done better? And what could we do better from the lessons we learned there on future projects? Because this is just the beginning of some of the projects that we have going on in North Kansas City.
So I think Armour Road taught us a lot about the representative majority, what appears to be the majority of people who are active, engaged, and involved. And I think we had meetings. I know I heard Rita and Jesse, like I've heard people talk about the meetings that led up to this decision. And I know there were community members who were active, speaking up about certain things. But I also think there's a large number of community members who weren't fully informed about what was happening. And therefore, they caught a small piece of it. Sounds good. Sounds great. And as it turns out, maybe they weren't completely looped in. And for me, I think we've learned now that communication needs to start at the beginning and carry through all the way until the end of the project, that people need to be looped in at the beginning. And for me, I think it's also another point where I, as a person who is not on city council yet, but who thinks about the way that I would love for my city council to be run, I think this is one of those points where I think Jesse Smith said something about a shared responsibility, which I really appreciated, because there's a shared responsibility to get that information out there, but there's also a responsibility to kind of digest that information. But I do want to be clear that I still feel that there is more that council members can do to be engaging the community, to be making that communication clear, to make sure that people are digesting it properly, asking questions, having discussions, and then even seeking out and trying to engage people who maybe you wouldn't normally, because they're not the people who are, at every meeting or online talking about it, apartment complexes. For example, just trying to get more people in the community engaged in the decisions. I think for me, the Armor Road project was really eye-opening on that, where it seemed like everything was fine once the decision was made and we started breaking ground on it. All of the naysayers came out very heavily. And I really feel like we could have avoided that with better communication in the beginning. But for me, the Armor Road project, it's far reaching. It's pretty big. It's not this little thing that's happening right now. It's not the bike lanes. It's bigger than that. And I think it's important to remember that and what it will offer our city in the future. As far as, the ability to walk around easily, safely, connecting some of the businesses that we will still, have yet to come, some businesses that haven't even been thought up yet, or, rabbit hole that's back there. But for me, I think once we get past the negative feelings that surround the way that it happened, we can kind of look to the future and focus on all of the little changes that we're going to have to make sure that it's perfect for us. And I think as a community, I think we need to let go of the fact that we feel left out of the decision, and that we need to move beyond that and now make sure that our voices are being heard as we move forward on this project, which is really the only thing we can't do. But for me, it's really just about communication. And I think for me, Armor Road really showed me where we were kind of lacking in that connection.
Do you think that we're thinking through these projects all the way to its conclusion and the unintended consequences? For example, have you driven on Armor from Quick Trip into downtown recently?
Yes, frequently, actually. I don't mind Armor as much. I also don't mind slower roads.
Right. But let me finish my question.
Okay.
Have you noticed the significant number of potholes on Armor?
Yes.
That has never been the case in the history that I have been visiting or living here in North Kansas City over the last 30 years. And it brings to mind, did we consider as we went into this Armor Road redesign that we're taking traffic flow from 3 lanes, putting it into 1 lane, and it wasn't paved for that level of traffic when we paved it? So are we thinking about, because whether you like the design or not, are we thinking projects through completely? It's one of the things that has started to bubble to the surface is that we're not thinking about those unintended consequences. We're not thinking through to the conclusion of the project and everything that we might have to mitigate. And part of that in the communication process, as you said, maybe some of those questions would be answered by people with that perspective or that expertise that might have saved us some mistakes along the way.
Mm-hmm. I think this kind of ties in with the post I made recently about conflict. I think a lot of people view conflict negatively, just innately. It's a negative thing. We don't like it. We avoid conflict. I don't know at what point I started viewing it differently, but I know, it's been at least 10 years or so where I started to truly understand what conflict is and how vital it is to fully understanding situations. If there is a conflict, it exists for a reason. It means that 2 people have very different ideas, or more than 2, but it doesn't mean one of them is wrong, or it could mean both of them are wrong. It could mean both of them are a little bit right. But for me, I think a lot of people go into conflict like war. You're wrong, I'm right. That's it. We can sit here and talk about it, but all we're going to talk about is how right I am and how wrong you are, versus looking at it like a chance to learn something new. I like to enter into most conversations with the understanding that I'm not the smartest person in the room. And if I can open my ears and close my mouth a little bit, then maybe there is something that I can take away from whatever situation I'm in. Maybe I can learn something new from somebody who has more experience, a different perspective, conflict. So to me, when we talk about these things, it comes down to, if we tried less to avoid that community conflict and more on trying to make sure that it's constructive, you're correct. There might have been people who had input who could have said, hey, this is what we're doing. We're actually now making it so that everybody has to drive heavily on these lanes. Like that could be a problem in the future. For all we know, somebody in the community might have had that opinion or could have, had that experience to voice that. But unless we are actively seeking out and engaging those communications, the ones that are considered conflict or the ones that, don't necessarily tie in with our beliefs or, our formed understanding of whatever given topic, to me, I think we could do a lot better, but I don't necessarily think that's just specific to the Armor Road project. I think that's specific to all things in life, but specifically when it comes to the city and how it works. Like, I think that's something that we really need to do better with. Just reframing conflict.
So on that note of conflict, we do have lots of people with lots of flavors and independent thought and personalities. And so when we think of a diverse population, in some ways we're less diverse, and in other ways we're very diverse. We have a very large demographic when it comes to age, when it comes to socioeconomic backgrounds. When you have all of these people with different thought processes in their mind, it can become challenging to garner cooperation and collaboration, which is one of the things you were just alluding to. So how do you foster and continue to nurture that independent thought and yet transition that into cooperation and collaboration to get stuff done?
So I think I'm going to attack this from two different angles. I think for me personally, that shift in mentality when it comes to conflict, it's not instantaneous. Not all people can just do it. A lot of times it takes work and practice and learning how to have conflicting ideas constructively. And it takes, I can't control the way other people react or respond to things. I can only control the way that I do. And I also know when you go in and you talk to certain people, there are good ways and bad ways to communicate with people. And if we're going in thinking, like I said previously, we're the smartest person in the room, we know everything. In my opinion, that's kind of where we hit a wall. Personally, I think to hear right now during this campaign period, I've heard a million great ideas. I've heard a lot of things from a lot of different people, whether it be candidates or just people in the community. I love hearing those new ideas. But another thing I've also seen is bad conversation where people are doing things from a place of dislike rather than addressing the issue from like a rational point of view. We don't like this person, so it doesn't matter what they say, we're going to attack it. We don't care if it was a good idea or a bad idea. It has no merit because we don't like this person. And I think as far as a community goes, that is the least constructive thing in the world. That just, we go in circles with that. Nothing gets changed or accomplished. Versus being able to say, I'm not going to love everybody and not everybody is going to love me, but we can disagree constructively. We can both talk about our points of views and we can discuss where we differ. And when we do that, maybe both of us or one of us can try to draw new conclusions from that. But I just watching all of the great ideas being thrown out, I think we have a community full of really intelligent people with lots of really great ideas. Whether, we're personally best friends or not, it doesn't really matter to me, especially when you're stepping into the role of a council person. It's more about effective, constructive communication that we can kind of help people to see their dreams become realities when it comes to things like we've talked about farmers markets, co-ops. Wesley talked about condos. We've talked about, maybe changing up the what street designated as street legal and not, things like that. Like, we don't have to shut ideas down. Rather, we can look into all of them, kind of figure out if it would be a good fit for our community or not. But for me, it's just about hearing everything. I want to make sure that I hear everything people are saying. I try to understand it and digest it, whether I 100% agree with it or not. And I think with that kind of thinking, we can do a lot better. We can actually come to compromises or, at least hash out all the issues and kind of learn both sides.
So as you think about this role of going into the city council, what do you think is the biggest responsibility of a city council person?
I think that's kind of a hard one. There's a lot of responsibilities, but I guess I'm just going to keep bringing it back to communication. I think for me, the biggest role of a city council member is to be able to essentially keep that line of communication going. So they receive information, they read and digest that information. Then it's on them to get that information to the public. Then they engage the public, talk about those issues, answer questions. And then it just comes back around full circle. Now they can go back into the council meeting with a more formed idea of what the community wants. But I think it's remembering that they represent the voice of the community. And I think that's the most important role. But, other than that, there's a million other things that they have to be ready to do. Preparedness in general, I think is important. Being prepared to process a lot of information and try to make good decisions. But again, I don't think any of that can happen without a foundation of communication between the people they represent and them. Like that has to be, I think, the first step to making sure that you're making good decisions on behalf of the city and the people who live there.
So outside of communication, what is your biggest asset that you would bring to the table as a council person?
I care. I love, I think I mentioned previously, I love doing better. I think that if we are living our lives in a way in which we are growing, and this is individually, as a community, as a nation, whatever, but nothing's changing, that's bad. To me, that is not a good thing, because we have all had experiences that should change and shape us and make us better people if we're actually, reflecting upon those things that we've done in the past. And to me, I always like to do better. I like every opportunity to learn more and do better. And for me, I think that would get us far as a city. I'm always willing to jump in on a good idea and help people get those off the ground. I'm a people person. I like people. I love hearing. And the thing is, I love hearing conflicting ideas. I know there's a lot of people who avoid conflict and hate it. I thrive in those productive conflict environments when you can sit down and have a conversation with somebody and not agree, but talk for 2 hours about it. That is, for me, kind of what I bring to the table, is that I am great at talking to people. I really genuinely care, not just about the community, but about the people who live in this community. I'm a very empathetic person, and I can't help that. Sometimes it's a great thing. Sometimes it's really hard. But it's just being able to connect with the people that live here. I've already done that in my short time living here. 5 years, not that short, actually. I have to keep reminding myself it's been quite a while. But it's creating those relationships. I'm very good at that. I love those relationships. I love this neighborhood and the people who, we know. I love our businesses. And again, the people who run them and work there, they're wonderful. So for me, I think it's just more about I'm already engaged in the community. I already know a lot of the people who live here and, some of their different interests and beliefs. And I think that just, that door's already open. So
what do you think the biggest challenge that North Kansas City is going to face in the next 5 years?
Well, I think that really depends on the decisions that we make and how we make them. We clearly live in a city that is growing. People want to live here. And whether you're for or against, new apartments, they will benefit our city if done the right way, if everything's handled the right way. But again, it comes down to all those little details and making sure that we're doing things right. For me, I think the biggest challenge is going to be making sure that we're doing things right when we bring in new developments, which I think we're going to see a little more of in the next 5 years, especially. We want to make sure that the people are on board with it, that it fits. I think I've talked about this before, that it fits the vibe of our community. And I also think there's some unseen and untalked about things that we're going to want to look into, like sustainability. As we grow, I know it's been brought up by some members of the community, like, are we going to be able to handle that population growth that we talk about, that's in the master plan? And honestly, I think the biggest challenge going forward is going to be how we navigate what's coming, how the decisions we make, how we make them, how we include the community in these decisions. And just, being very careful. We have an amazing place to live, and it's very special. It's unique. And for me, it's not losing that. I don't want us to ever find ourselves in a situation 5 or 10 years from now where we don't recognize North Kansas City. So biggest hurdles that we're going to have are, I think, growing responsibly. So we just got to make sure that we're doing it.
Yeah, I can't remember who brought it up earlier. It might not have even been in these interviews. It might have been within a private conversation I had, but there was already some discussion about how our water and sewer, are impacted already by the new apartments coming in, and making sure that we can maintain the quality level of the water that we have. Thinking about that before the need is there. We've already approved these projects, so now what do we need to do to make sure that when those projects complete, that we have the infrastructure set up
to support?
Exactly. So, great insight.
I mean, it's preparedness, forethought, it's preparation for the future. So, I think it's not.
With the pandemic, we learned that too. And you talked about that earlier, is, okay, now we've learned that we have to be able to pivot quicker. But the thing, and we did pivot quick, our leadership here did, but there were limitations. We don't have our own health department. We don't, we were kind of looking at the county for some guidance, and we were looking at the other cities around us, and because who knew, with the leadership that is currently on the council, how much experience they were going to need to rely on in 2020. And I think that is one of the interesting things, that as I've interviewed all of you candidates, is that you've all recognized that preparedness is incredibly important to the survival of North Kansas City, and to the residents being able to navigate it, as well as the businesses, which leads me to the next question. What do you think is the biggest challenge that businesses in North Kansas City are facing right now? Outside of just the occupancy and the masking, all of those pandemic things, if COVID, they finally gave us the all clear and we were all ready to go, what challenges would the businesses still be facing right now as we go into the rest of the year?
So for me, as a person who is not a small business owner, only having talked to some of you guys, I think it's support. I know a couple of people have told me that they've reached out. I think Adam actually touched on this as well too, maybe in his interview or in the forum, that we're all going back to communication again. Sorry, guys. I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but to me, it's so important. But that, they would reach out and maybe not get swift communication from their council members or whoever it was they were trying to get information from. Support. I think we do well, and I still think we could do better. I think we have a city that supports our small businesses, but I also think that there's more we could do. And I know we have a lot of community members who actually step up and try to push us in that direction, or try to, I know we have, what is the NKC Go and things like that have popped up. And that's just people in the community trying to get us to be more local oriented, to support our small businesses more. But for me, I just always think it's going to come down to so right now, so we went to Dollar General the other day. It was 8 o'clock at night on a Friday night, I believe, and there was literally nowhere to park. I circled the block 7 times, not even a joke. I just kept going around trying to get a close place to park. And finally, there right at the end, I got a spot. It was still a distance away, but I realized that comes from the current construction that's happening, that current parking lot that is not usable. And for me, it's these little infrastructure issues, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong, because again, I don't own a small business, but I think these little decisions affect you guys a lot. And I don't know if communication beforehand with those business owners, and I know that does happen. I'm not saying the city doesn't communicate with you guys when things happen. But I do think that there are places we could do better. Go ahead. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're right. There is some communication, but a lot of the communication happens with property owners
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily the tenants of businesses. So, you know, again, improvement. How do we do that and do that better? And parking is an issue, and it's going to be an issue, and we're going to have to solve it, and it's going to take some money to solve it. Those of us that have ideas to solve it, it's going to take some money to solve it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a longer conversation. If anybody
I've
has
just noticed it a lot recently. For the record, the parking thing has been, as things are happening, construction's happening, the pandemic. It's just been there are definitely places.
Simple solution. We're asking people to park a block or two to the east. Gosh, I'm a Minnesota girl. I still get turned around here. A zillion years later. You know, they're parking over there by NKC Pro Bowl in those city lots over there, and then they're walking to where they're going. Problem is visibility, and if you saw the striping on 18th Street today, you would be really shocked, as I was. Go do that. I have pictures.
Okay.
But we're not thinking again about unintended consequences. If we're going to displace people from parking there, why are we not passing on the cost of a shuttle to the developer for the period of time of their construction? It's a legit question. Again, it's thinking 10 steps ahead, but having that communication that you're talking about allows us to have those conversations in a timely fashion instead of asking the question, why didn't we pass that on and make them think about the transportation and the protection of the people getting from the parking lot to where they want to go. And quite frankly, you hit a hot topic, Jessica.
No.
What about the building that's going up and the parking lot that's going in behind it will be surrounded by 4 buildings? I don't know about you as a woman, I'm not parking there.
I mean, see, and there's other things that I think come from a perspective that is important. I don't know, but I think I just keep hitting this communication issue, as you just said. Maybe some of these things could have been avoided and or just planned a little better with a little more communication to the business owners, to the community themselves. But I mean, I think the question was like, what is the biggest challenge for these businesses? For me, I'm going to have to say it's parking. But also, I think some of that comes from it's the Armour Road project that makes it easier for people to walk from point A to point B. So I'm not saying that we haven't thought of all of these things. I'm just saying that we probably could have done a little better, because I'm sure our current council members and whoever else was involved in these projects did their best to think of these potential issues. But maybe they could have done better at communicating with the business owners.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because your planning commission reviews these and then they make recommendations to the council, and the council has varying degrees of expertise in they're trusting that the city staff and the planning commission, they've all done their due diligence, and that by the time it gets to council, it's ready for, yeah, it's a great idea, or no, it's not. And they're trusting that those things have happened. And Yet the council persons are the ones that people come to and expect the communication from about the details of it, but they don't always know the details. So I think you just hit on something really, really smart.
So recently, Sarah discussed the city master plan, and I loved that. As a person who maybe doesn't know everything there is to know about the master plan going forward, or how it was developed, I really loved that breakdown for the layperson, so that we can digest and understand what was the thought process, how we got there. Now, I wasn't here, back in 2000, what was it, 15, when it was finalized, or but could they have done better about communicating then too? I don't know. To me, it's more of a, are we listening to the people in the community? And as you just mentioned, like, is it really the responsibility 100% of council to have all the answers? I would say, so as you were speaking a minute ago, preparedness is important. Jesse talked about how there is a million things to read. And yes, a council person could say, well, I just hoped that, they were doing their due diligence. And maybe that kind of lets them off the hook a little bit. But I'm pretty sure that when you choose to run for city council, that means that you are understanding your responsibility to inform yourself. You're not an average community member anymore. You have made a decision. And therefore, you should know. You should know all of the information you've been given, essentially. So, if I'm given a packet of information and I browse through it, if I've missed something, it's on me. Like, it doesn't matter how prepared the people who came before me were. It's on, if I have questions, if there's something I don't understand, as a council person, I think it's up to them to be making sure they're asking these questions, answering their own questions or the community's questions. But as I said, I don't know, how well they did, or if they could have done better. I'm just assuming that they could.
So what I'm hearing you say is, going back to that question about the biggest responsibility of a council person, you had said communication, but the flip side, the other side of the coin of communication, is the self-education and preparedness to be able to do the communication.
So if I could, I would draw you a little thing, a little chart, so you can, but to me, that's part of it. It's a circle. The council members are given information. They then have to digest that information, which, as Jesse said, is not easy. It's not just browsing over. It's really digging in, getting your questions answered, and then relaying that information to the community. That's, going one way, and then it goes back, all the way back to the city. So for me, yes, these council members, or our council members, they are in between that communication. It's up to them.
Or is there a space where there should be some public relations that educates and informs the community about what's going on, and and allows the council people to do what their real job is?
That's good too. I suggested a while back, I talked to some community members about, so we do a Wednesday wrap up. I don't know how aware people are of this, but there is a wrap up after city council meetings. Not always available. I know there's been 2 times recently in the past where I've gone to the Wednesday wrap up, so I didn't have to go and rewatch the video I'd already watched, and the link is broken. But we're getting a new website pretty soon, so hopefully we won't have those broken links anymore. But I think maybe it's time we revisit outreach and how we communicate with the public. I don't know how many people even know that Wednesday wrap up exists, or if they check it out, but it does break down.
Like, I'm the council informed in this town, and I didn't know about it. And if
it's on the city,
if I don't know about it, there's a lot of people that don't know about it.
That's kind of what I was saying in our the forum. I don't know if I touched on it very well, but that we live in an age of technology, and no, not everybody communicates via technology, and there are definitely things we have to do on that side of the spectrum for the people who aren't plugged in. But for the people who are plugged in, we definitely live in a time where it shouldn't be that hard to find information. So I'm really hoping, I really can't wait for this new website, the redesign, to see what it has to offer. And I hope that solves some of those problems. But yes, like I think as you do that.
Sorry, I was looking for questions from the group, and
Right.
and it suddenly was you talking.
It's all right.
Okay, so
But
we
no,
do have a couple questions. So let me ask a couple other questions before we wrap up. There's a question about your resume and what job experience you bring to the table for this job.
Okay, so I'm trying to
I'll
find
ask
them.
the questions. You don't need to read them.
All
I'll ask
right.
them.
So honestly, as far as being in the political arena, never done it before. This is all new to me, but personally, I don't think we should have career politicians as our local city council members, or, you know, in other positions like that, because we're a small town. We don't have that many residents. I don't need a career politician who is making the decisions. I need somebody who lives here, who's plugged in, who knows what's going on. But before jumping into the city council race, I definitely got involved in some community projects, started some community projects here. We started a small community advocacy group called the North Kansas City Citizens for Accountability and Transparency. We had, 8 or so members who showed up. We would sit up at Mackin Park. We really just wanted to address some of the concerns that were being thrown out towards the beginning of the pandemic. I think we did a good job. And then from that grew kind of the idea of the North Kansas City Equity and Inclusion Committee. And, as far as resume, no, I'm not a politician. I've never done politics before. But I learned very quickly how to navigate the waters, who to talk to, how to talk to them, how to be persistent.
How did you learn to do that? What
I
is
just did it
in your background that made it so that you had to pull up by the bootstraps and learn how to navigate these waters?
I think I mentioned I'm really great at talking to people. And I think that just comes from the life that I've had, the experiences I've had. Didn't always have the easiest life, and you just kind of have to learn to be action oriented. You have to learn how to do things for yourself. But me being the person I am, I also like to be able to do things for others. So I've learned that as well. And when it came to an idea that was kind of bigger than we were, I started with research. I jumped in and we were like, well, how do we communicate better? What can we do? We found another diversity committee. And then from there, it came from, every life experience you've had. Who do you talk to? Well, somebody who's in charge. So I reached out to my city council members. I chose to go another method. I think for me, when I thought of my city council members, I thought of them as probably a little overwhelmed with information. I imagine they have a lot to do. So when I pitched an idea, I tried to come at it from the most formed idea possible. So I tried to do all the legwork and groundwork and basically get all of the questions that I thought people would ask out of the way. I did debate and forensics. And for me, that was always like an important thing, is kind of knowing what to expect from whoever you're going to talk to. Like, that's important. So yeah, it's doing all of the groundwork. It's jumping in, and what taught me that is just the life that I've led.
So everything in your backstory is what led you to where you are.
Yeah, but it's a long, crazy one. So I don't know if we have time for all that.
We don't. We only have about 5 minutes.
I touched on it a little in one of my posts. So if anybody wants to go check that out on the Jess Loya for NKC Facebook page, there is a little bit about that there. But
okay, so last question. How are you helping to promote and champion the neighborhood shops and storefronts in the face of all this new development?
Ooh, always. We are avid. Well, especially since the pandemic began, I'm not going to lie, I've probably grown a few belt sizes, and I'm not mad about it. But we are constantly out and about here in North Kansas City and all of our local businesses. We know people, we know our friends that work there, our friends that own it. I do happen to have a very what is the word for my child? Socialite. She knows everybody. Their dog. If you have a dog in the city of North Kansas City, she probably knows you. She probably knows your name and maybe even where you live. She might work for the CIA. I do not know, but she'll tell me all the time. She'll be like, "Oh, that's so and so. They live over on Erie," and I'm like, "Okay, yeah, they have a dog. Oh, okay."
Of course they do.
Yeah, that's always how I know. But having a child like that who's so eager and out there and communicating with people all the time, it kind of forces you into those situations. Like, we could sit at home. What do you want to do? Oh, I just want to go up to Colony. Okay, like, let's do it. So we are constantly out and about. I think Amy from Little Star is probably one of my daughter's favorite people in the city. She gives her all the good pies, but we are constantly advocating for, constantly telling people to go there. We pretty much talk nonstop about things, places here in North Kansas City, trying to get our friends that don't live here to come out. But when it comes to more politically, it's just trying to support the people who are already doing the work. I know Joe Gower has the NKC Go thing going on. I'm trying to repost anything he posts or interact with things like that. But on city council, it would be more about supporting those businesses and policy that helps those businesses. But we love our businesses. That's one of the best things about North Kansas City.
It is. So unfortunately, we have one more interview this evening that I need to end our conversation with and move on to. I look forward to more conversations with you in the future, no matter how the election turns out. There's 4 candidates running in your ward, and I think it's important for people to understand that that's a good thing. It's a great thing because it gives the residents choices. A lot of people talk about splitting the vote, and yes, that can happen, but at the same time, having choices when you go to the polls and having the opportunity to get to know them, because we are a small enough community that we can do that, it's a great blessing. So with that, April 6th is election day for the general municipal election. You've heard me say it before. You'll hear me say it again. And the general municipal election is the most important election that we have, but the least attended by voters. And yet our council, our mayor, they're the ones that were making all of our decisions about what we get to do as business owners, as residents, as community members. All of this last year, ultimately, it came down to what our city council and our mayor determined that we were going to have to do. So please get out and vote on April 6th. And if you have any more questions for Jessica or any of the candidates, please feel free to reach out to them independently. All of their information is out there on the city website as well as on their Facebook pages. Thank you, Jessica. I'm going to sign off.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. You guys